Hey guys, welcome back to You Are Here. I'm your host, Danny, and this is a podcast all about growing up and figuring it out together. Today, I have one of my best friends in the whole world on the pod. She's been here before, and today we're talking all about our relationship with church hurt, church trauma, whatever you want to call it. It's something that happens. We just want to make sure that you feel heard and seen, and maybe you get some help and some advice along the way. So let's get into it. Chelsea, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me for such a fun topic.
Yeah, save the most fun and the easiest to talk to and talk about.
Right, perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Yeah. But I'm so excited. Okay, so my first question. I love also doing this, like having conversations like this, because I feel like obviously we spend a lot of time together, but we never talk about like in depth like these things. Obviously I've talked about like the experiences and all that stuff, but in depth. So I would love to hear about just your story surrounding church, like growing up and hearing about what did you hear about church, or like people's relationship with church, like your parents, and yeah. So I would love to hear.
Yeah. I grew up in church. We were Catholic when I was little. So my mom grew up Catholic, and so when we were born, her and my dad always took us to mass, all of that stuff. And so we did that until I was probably 10, and we moved to a new town. And this is how small my hometown was. There wasn't a Catholic church in the town we moved to.
Whoa.
If I'm remembering correctly. So we picked the next best thing when we went to a Methodist church. Right. So then I did that all through high school, junior high school. And I loved it. I was so involved in youth group. I like served in different ways. I was like on a little leadership team, like a mini leadership team. It was very cute. Great experience. Like some really fond memories. My youth pastor was like my hero. Like, yeah. And then it's kind of like, I've seen it all. So then in high school, as everyone started, you start going to youth group because your friends are going. Right. All my friends went to the Baptist church. And so then I started going to the Baptist church to be with my friends at their youth group, as one does. Mm-hmm. So then I was there, and then really walked away from the Lord, walked away from church for a little over a year. Yeah. And when I came back, when I really feel like I got saved, I started going to a non-denominational charismatic church. That was an experience coming from all of that background and then walking into that. Goodness. What an experience. But it changed my life. And so I've always been in church. I've had a relationship with church. It was really important to my mom. My dad didn't go as much, but he would go like with us sometimes. But it was really like, it was very important to my mom. And so we were always going, always involved. And I really liked it. Like as a kid, it was where I found friends. It was like what I did. It was what I was known for. Like I was a church kid, all of that stuff. And then as I got saved and grew in my faith, it became my own of like, oh, I need this, like to be healthy. I need this to be around people who are helping me grow and helping me achieve what I want to achieve, like all of those things. So I feel like I've always had a pretty healthy understanding of like my need for being connected to a body. Yeah. So.
Yeah. That's awesome. In those like years that you weren't a part of church, was that because of anything that you experienced? You were just kind of like, I'm over it.
A little bit of like, I'm over it, but a little bit, it was less to do with church, I think, and more to do with my perception of God. Okay. Up to that point, even though great church experiences, I really like viewed God legalistically. And so it was very like
Catholic guilt.
The Catholic guilt of it all. Yep. It was really like you have to do good to be good with God, which is not it's the opposite of the gospel. Yeah. I digress. But it's what I believed. And so when I started getting older, started making some of my own choices, some of them not so good, getting involved in things that I shouldn't have. I just like ran away basically.
Yeah.
Cause I knew it was wrong. I knew it wasn't the right choice for me or for what God had called me to be. And so the Catholic guilt of it all, I just was like, then I'll just see my way out.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
No, that totally makes sense. I think that is I feel like a very common, like, a situation, story to like, especially here, like in Texas.
Yeah, the Bible Belt.
Bible Belt, anything.
Yeah.
Like growing up so heavily involved in church, and somewhere along the lines, your wires getting crossed and like not actually hearing the gospel, and you're like, I'm out.
Right.
Yeah.
You just like, you know it all, but none of it's real.
Yeah.
Or it's like a little twisted.
For sure.
Just a little bit.
For sure.
The most important twist, but like a little bit, you know?
Right. Exactly. Okay. So now like present day, you're very involved in church. You're like, like your life is dedicated to like evangelism and to sharing the gospel. So, but I know that there was a few years, you've also been involved in many different kinds of churches and like church government structures as well. But I do want to get into as well, like the, you know, I guess the question or like the bulk of the pod of the idea of like your villain origin story. And what I mean by that is like, there are certain like moments that happen in everyone's life, I think, where like, it's kind of like a do or die. Like the way that you handle this situation will determine the way that you perceive the world, the way you perceive yourself, the way you perceive other people, the way you perceive church, the way you perceive so many things. And I think it happens in like different contexts of your life. But what was essentially that moment where you were like, I have to decide if I'm going to be healthy or if I'm going to like stay bitter or hurt or whatever.
Yeah. Man, oh man. Hey, I wrote notes and I brought notes because I knew I needed that. I needed that for this.
And take it away.
Thank you so much. So, I'm just kidding. No, so basically, so my most recent experience with church is I was serving in student ministry somewhere. I served there for a decade, so I was like all in. Like I interned there. I was spending 30 plus hours a week at the church serving, very involved. Had at some points had staff access and emails and all of those things, just of how involved I was serving. And then there was a situation where the details truly don't really matter. But basically an accusation was made against me. That was a pretty serious one. It was one that should be taken seriously, especially in church. About having an inappropriate relationship with a man that was also serving and working in the church. And it was taken very seriously, as it should, and it was investigated, and it was found to be not true, because it was not true. But the way that it was handled from there on out was essentially a PR choice. And it was super hurtful. It was super, super confusing. Basically, I got to a place where, like, I was stripped of some of my responsibilities. I basically was blacklisted from working at the church. Again, none of it was true, but I was essentially told, like, out of an abundance of caution, to be overly above reproach just in case how it looks, basically, is what I was told. Why all of these things, why I was being told you've done nothing wrong, but we're still gonna enact this stuff.
Right.
And so, yeah, that sucks.
Yeah.
Like, I basically got to this place where I was like, well, dang, all of this work I've done, all of the character I've fought to build like in myself, like the dark moments where no one sees of building integrity and building character in my life don't matter because the right person said this right thing to someone who had the power to basically blacklist me. And I like felt like my life was stolen from me. Like my dream was to work for the church, like to be in ministry. It was clearly my life. All of my time went to this. And I just like didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to process that. I didn't know how to move on from it. I like started overthinking literally everything of like, because this accusation about an inappropriate relationship, I was like, oh my gosh, like if I say this or I say that, it could be misconstrued as having a crush on this person. Or if I post about somebody, they're going to think that I like them. It was even crazy enough, like, and I still catch myself doing this and it's so embarrassing. It's not embarrassing because no one else knows about it until right now. But like, I still catch myself doing this of like, I literally would think like, oh, if we're in a meeting and a married man is talking and I'm looking at him too long while he's talking, people might think I'm interested and there's something going on. Insane. That's an insane thought. Crazy, yeah. But it was because I felt so out of control and defenseless of like this person could come and make this wild claim and it was taken as if it was true even though it wasn't. Right. What else could they do? What else could they say about me? Is basically what I internalized. And so I just became insane. Like literally like digging through every piece of my life of like how to control never letting this happen again. And I literally felt crazy. I felt so defenseless. I felt silenced because the people who were caring enough to walk with me, the pastors that were like, we know this is not you. Yeah. Like, we know this is not true about you. The people that were walking with me were trying to help me like process and be, handle it righteously. And so their advice was to like cover the person who said this thing by not gossiping about it, by not trying to defend myself, by telling everyone like all of these things. And they were right ultimately, but in the moment what I felt was silenced. And I just reread my journal from this time period before you came over to like really dig it all back up. For sure. And I like multiple times had written in there, I had nightmares about like literally through this season, like multiple times had nightmares of this one pastor standing on stage in front of the entire church and saying something crazy about me. Like calling me out and me not being able to do anything about it. Yeah. Or I would have nightmares where like someone was attacking me and I was trying to scream and there was nothing coming out. Like literally multiple times throughout this season. Yeah. So it was just like affecting everything about me. And I really did like let it take me to such a dark place, such a like bitter and cynical place. Because I felt like my life was destroyed. Absolutely. Unfairly, unjustly. And I like wanted that justice so bad that I was trying to fight for it myself. Like, and I would like have these insane like daydreams of like the pastor standing on the stage and calling out these people that did this wrong to me in front of everyone and vindicating me and like whatever. And I just started to have this really like unquenchable need for justice about the situation. I wanted this person fired and I wanted them and it was like all these things that it was like that wasn't actually going to help me feel better, but I was so obsessed with it that I like was so bitter that when it didn't happen and when there weren't people that were like, Chelsea, we know that you never would do that. Which there were people behind the scenes, but like the general populace, I wanted the whole church to come by and be like, we know your character. We know you're innocent. And me to be like, thank you so much. I am free now. For sure. Like, but that like obviously is not practical, or even necessarily helpful. But yeah, so I just was so bitter and it was starting to affect like my life. It was starting to affect my friendships of like, I couldn't just sit down and have dinner without being like, can you believe, you know, whatever. It started to affect like my relationship with church. I through this season, obviously really wanted to leave the church, at least to go somewhere else. I knew I needed church. I just didn't want this church. But I knew that the Lord was not releasing me. I knew that he was like, you need to stay. You need to stay. You have a calling here. You're in ministry. Like you have an assignment from me. I don't want you to leave. And that was like dying. That was like dying to have to walk in every day to walk into rooms where I knew people were whispering about me, to walk into situations where I was like, everyone around me is worshiping and I'm weeping from being triggered. Yeah, it was like death.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that bitterness started to affect my relationship with church. And then ultimately, obviously, the end of that is almost always, it affected my relationship with God. I started to view God as like, well, why haven't you vindicated me? Why haven't you corrected this person? Why would you allow them to do this? And so it affected my intimacy and my relationship with him. Yeah, so that was my village and origin story.
Yeah.
Clearly a lot there.
Absolutely.
And that's a very shortened version of that.
For sure.
Unfortunately.
Hey, between the two of us, we got stories on stories.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But I think something that you touched on at the end there that I think is actually like a great, not like a tip, but maybe like a red flag or something to keep in mind. Like if you have experienced any kind of like church hurt or like pain or offense, I think something that is like such a great thing is like whenever there's any kind of like bitterness or like anger that you're harboring towards a person, I feel like the slippery slope is it does affect the way you view God. And I think that's almost like a way in like God's, order that he structured that, because obviously we're all made in his image. Mm-hmm. So it's like the second that you allow yourself to judge someone else or to make a judgment of like, you're this person, you're whatever, whether that's like you're the receiving end of that or you're the one doing that, either way, like what you're risking is ultimately your view of God himself,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is like so interesting and obviously like devastating for both people, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I saw you, I think kind of walk through this season. I think I was still a student when this was all going on.
I think it was right when you left.
Right when I left. Okay. So yeah, I wasn't really here, but I remember obviously like calling you and stuff like that and hearing about this and just being like, feeling the same way, feeling like WTF, like we need to solve this. Like who can I call? Like who can I make it like right?
Let me email the elders.
Like someone like me being like so justice oriented, like this isn't right. But yeah, how, I guess like, so from that moment of like experiencing all of those things and those feelings, and just like walking through that season of death, how did you feel, I guess, like coming out of that, or how did you come out of that place? Also, I can't stop thinking about the verse in Psalm 91, like he makes a table before me, for my enemies, like
23. Yeah.
23. Yeah. Like so
Hey, don't
crazy.
get me started on that verse.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. How did you see God like also come alongside you through that dying process?
Yeah.
There's just so much. I was like, oh my gosh, like carry your own cross and like die, like all those things. There really does come a place in a time in everyone's life of a believer where you have to, the rubber meets the road. Yeah,
it's not easy. It's not meant to be.
Right.
Like you have to make a choice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what did that choice look like for you?
I think I ultimately got to a place where I could recognize that my heart was sick. Like my heart was so sick, and it wasn't just at this one person. It wasn't just at church. It wasn't just at the Lord. It was like at everyone. Everyone was caught in the crossfires of my like bitterness and pain and need to defend myself at all times and, whatever, all of that stuff. And so ultimately, like, I feel like the Lord brought me to a place of like, hey, you need to work through this and forgive them and move past this, not because necessarily I also had this insane need for them to come back and admit that they were wrong and to apologize. Mm-hmm. The like two people that I like blamed in this situation as the main perpetuators of this. And the Lord was like, you need to forgive them, not because they've come back and said sorry, but because it's about your heart at this point. Mm-hmm. Like they made a choice and now I can see, like very much hindsight, I can see that I think that they genuinely had good intentions and were trying to do the right thing. They had a concern and they were trying to like cover people and make sure that things were right. I don't know that it was gone about the right way. I don't know like how it was said in a way. And again, like the church PR governance of it all that ultimately was the issue, more so than the person's like concern. But I realized like it does not matter if they ever come back and say sorry. I cannot live like this anymore. Like I cannot let my heart be so full of poison to where I'm like pushing people away from me at this point. Like my friends are getting sick of being around me because I am like just so cynical all the time. And all my friends worked at this church. And so it was like, I'm bashing their place of work. I'm bashing their bosses. I'm bashing, out of my pain and my need to like be defended. And so, yeah, I think I just ultimately had to come to a realization that it wasn't about their, it wasn't necessarily about justice or their repentance or whatever. It was about my heart, like my heart needing this. And so I went to therapy. Very important. I did, as I was reading through my journal, read a lot of the like letters my therapist made me write to these people.
Right.
Oh girl, some of them I was like, this needs to be burned. This was mean.
Or like maybe just mail it to them.
Or 3 years maybe they need to see it. No. Yeah. But I went to therapy and I started just doing the work of like moment by moment, making the choice to see myself as defended, as like the Lord will make your justice shine like the noonday sun. That's in Psalms somewhere. But like choosing to see myself as like the Lord is my vindicator. Like the people who truly know me, because these people didn't know me. Ultimately, they were like not close friends of mine or people that served with me. Like, so they didn't know me. And all the people that knew me knew that was like never something I would do. Like that it was very just out of character for me. So to like take the moment to recognize that, like the people who do know you know that this is not you. The Lord is your defender. The Lord is your vindicator. And just kind of like every time, that's the hard part, is like you do it once and you're like, cool, I'm good. I forgave them. But then another moment comes, and it stirs back up and you have to do it again. And I think that was the hard part for me, was I wanted it to be one and done. I'm better. I'm good. Yeah. And that's not how healing works. And so I just had to like continually build layers of forgiving them, which ultimately led me to blessing them. Not fun. I feel like that's like every healing podcast ever is like, you have to bless your enemies. Boo, that sucks. But it is true. Yeah. It's real. Yeah. Like and I knew I was healed or healing when I got to the point where I could say, Lord, I bless them. I bless their family. I bless their kids. I bless their ministry to prosper. Right. I bless them to grow in knowledge of you. I bless them to grow in righteousness. Like, whatever. So I had to do that. I had to actively, I'm looking through my notes, make sure, because this is the part that's like the most important to me, is the healing part. And then, this is huge. And why I have my Bible open to this verse, is I had to change who I viewed as the enemy in my story. So for a long, long time, you read the Psalms and it's like, Lord, smite my enemies. May they fall into the pit that they dug for me. Right. May they, whatever. And I would read these Psalms and be like, yes, Lord, let this happen. And picture a person's face. Right. And oh my gosh, like that's like, I get it. I can look back at me and be like, I feel so much compassion for how I felt and why I was feeling that way and thinking that about them. But I had to ultimately get to a place where I read like Psalm 35 of like, it's saying like, malicious witnesses testify against me. They accuse me of crimes I know nothing about. Like, David knew all of this, you know? So I'm like reading these and I'm like, yeah, they do. They do. You know, like, I'm attacked by people I don't even know. They slander me constantly, you know, whatever. And so I'm like reading these Psalms as like prayers to the Lord over these people. But then I'm forgiving them. I'm blessing them. I'm choosing to see the Lord as my defender, as my vindicator. And so suddenly the enemy is not becoming those faces and those names, but the enemy is becoming the enemy. Like, my enemy is not these people. My enemy is the accuser. Like, capital A. My enemy is division. My enemy is hatred. My enemy is bitterness that's trying to eat away at my life. My enemy is anxiety. My enemy is thinking that everyone's talking about me all the time because it's stopping me from being my full self. Like, those are my enemies. And so now I'm reading this like from that perspective, and I'm praying that prayer from that perspective. And yeah, that changed a lot for me. That changed so much for me to shift that perspective. You know, we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, you know. And I think being able to view it that way and recognize that, it changed the way I prayed about it. And that ultimately changed my heart towards those people. And again, realizing that like healing and forgiveness is layered, because I would put a lot of shame on myself when I would get triggered again. Like, even recently, I don't remember what it was, but something happened very recently that I got super triggered, and I was like shaking, and I couldn't think rationally. I'm like ranting to Hallie about it, you know, obsessively, like obsessively, not a normal amount. Like, and she was like, basically helped me recognize that I was triggered and it was tied back to this situation. And I felt a lot of shame about it. I was like, I should be over this by now. I've done so much work. I've forgiven them. you know, whatever. But like, shame doesn't help in that situation. You know, it just traps you there again. It puts you back in that place. But to recognize that this is a process and that it is a layered thing, and it's okay if you feel like you're reverted back to day one. You just like keep going. You just do it again. You just forgive, you know. That's helped me ultimately get closer and closer to being healed. And I feel like I largely am. I used to not be, thank you. I used to not be able to talk about it without like sobbing because it was just so painful 100%. And it was still such a easily opened wound. But I've put in a lot of work. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I'm like so glad and like obviously thankful for you, and to be able, like, I'm so fortunate to be able to have like watched you walk through this and like genuinely see how hard you fought to not just fight for yourself and like your own healing, but also to fight for your faith. Like, it truly was that. It was so much more than being hurt by someone else. And I think like that's really what I feel like sometimes younger people forget, that when you get hurt, like, you're fighting for so much more than just yourself, because it, like, our life is so interconnected to like one another, kind of like the point I was making before. But I was gonna say, one of my favorite quotes that I've heard, Peter Toggs, who was one of the pastors at Hillsong, I've obviously gone through their own thing with their family and everything, but he was asked, like, what have you learned through like this horrible season of like all these narratives coming out about your family and whatever. And he said, like, he's learned that the most important story is the one that you tell yourself. And like, I think that really is the key to like heal. Whether it's the church or like a friend or your family, the story, like, the only person you can control is yourself. And like, for the rest of your life, people are going to say whatever they want.
They're going to say crazy stuff.
Yeah. We always say at work, like, people be people in. And at the end of the day, people be people in. Like, you will always, like, there will be things that are out of your control. And you have to make that choice to like either like die a hero by killing yourself, or live to see yourself become the villain. Like, actually. And I think that really is the story and like the process of everyone like healing from that. Do you have any kind of like, I know it may be hard to like do bullet point or like 1, 2, 3 kind of vibe, but anything like if someone is facing like church hurt specifically, I guess something that you have practiced to like not grow jaded towards like the bride.
Yeah.
Or bitter towards the bride. Because so much of that, like you said, even your friends that worked there, that maybe they should have been saying something. Maybe they should have fought harder. Maybe they should have risked their job to defend their friend. Like whatever. Like those feelings were, like, how did you not, how are you like still so faithful to the bride?
I don't feel like that. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I guess is what I should say. Is because I don't feel like that is a great way to describe me at all times through this process.
Right.
But I do think that it is something I've fought for. And so it does mean a lot to hear that. I want to read, I thought of 2 more verses. So James 1, verse 19 is the one everyone knows. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. But the next verse is the one that's like, human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. And also in Hebrews 12, because I'll just tie them together. Hebrews 12. Hello? Oh, here it is. Verse 14 says to work at living in peace with everyone. Tough. Okay. But verse 15 says, Look after each other so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many. Mm. And I think that I just, like, yeah, ultimately you have to come to a place where you realize, like, if it's a situation where it's, like, abuse, like actual abuse, like all of these things, like, yes, those situations need justice. Absolutely. Like, ultimately they need justice. Yeah. And your heart deserves to be healed. Mm-hmm. So human, like, what did that verse just say? Human something. Anyways, it doesn't produce the righteous anger. I was getting tied up in the bitterness thing, and I was like, no, that was the other one. Human anger doesn't produce the righteousness that God desires, because his righteousness is higher than what we can think of. And so we think, like, in these situations that we need to, like, be angry and fight for all these things. And we do need to fight for justice, but ultimately our anger, typically unchecked and left to fester, produces a righteousness that's lower than what God actually wants to provide to a situation. Yeah. And it produces a root of bitterness that corrupts many. I was corrupting so many people around me by just my heart leaking poison of just being so bitter. And so I think that is, I don't know if that's a 1, 2, 3, but it is recognizing that like at the end of the day, even if nothing else, like, they don't get to steal this from you. Mm-hmm. Like, the person that did this or said this or whatever, they don't get to steal church from you. They don't get to steal your, like, self-perception from you. They don't get to steal trust and intimacy with God and with the people of God from you. Mm-hmm. And I think another big piece of that was, like, I had to ultimately come to the point of, like, where is it where Jesus is like, he says something that's really hard and difficult, and then he says, like, all these people leave, and he turns to the disciples and he says, are you going to leave too? Mm-hmm. And Peter's like, where are we going to go? You're the only one that has life. Mm-hmm. Like, where else would we go? You have life. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been like a mantra in my life in a lot of ways, of like, anytime something is hard, I'll look at the Lord and be like, yeah, I don't like this. Mm-hmm. Like, this sucks. But, like, where else am I going to go? Yeah. You are the one that has life. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think that's, you just have to arrive at that place in your heart where you're not willing to let your heart be corrupted by bitterness anymore. Mm-hmm. And where you realize, like, he's the only one that has life. Mm-hmm. And so either you let them steal that from you, or you do the work to forgive, to fight through, to dig out roots of bitterness, and to fight to be one with him, fight to let him defend you and vindicate you, even if that doesn't look like what you hope it does, even if that's not the daydream of, like, the pastor standing on the church platform and like telling everyone you were right, you know, or whatever. So yeah. Is that answer? I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. Yeah. I think it was a Bible project that I listened to or something, but they were talking about how like biblical righteousness is actually directly tied into our right standing with each other. Yeah. And how like it's not just about being right before God, but it's also about being right before his fellow images. Yeah. And I think like that is like, oh, that hurts me so badly because I don't want to do that.
Right. It's not that fun.
Yeah, like it's easier to be
especially
like,
when people suck.
Right. It's easier to be moral. Like, you know what I mean? And like not kill someone than it is to like be offended at them. Yeah. Like, and to not have to carry that offense. When you were talking about like not being able to forgive them, forgive like straight away, and you couldn't bless them, right? You could forgive them, but you couldn't bless them. I had a situation happen to me earlier this year where I was praying about something that was going on at church as well. And I was like, God, I can't forgive them right now, but I can bless them. Like the opposite happened to me where like I could recognize that like as a child of God, they can have this because I like I'm not giving them that. You know what I mean? Right. Like God, like that's in God's hands.
Not my business.
That's not my business. I can bless them. But to forgive, that took me a few weeks. A few weeks later, I was like, fine. Like I actually like I've forgiven them. It's okay. But like for me, it happened the opposite. So I think it's just like the journey and the offense and like the things that you experience, obviously. That also will impact like the way that you would navigate something like this kind of pain. But I think there is something very unique and like painful about your church hurting you or people that you perceive to be the church. It is very
uniquely hurtful.
It is a very unique and different kind of pain. But also, like you said, if there is like actual crimes being committed against you at church, like no, like you need to go to the police and like report that. But it's also you are like what happened to you isn't your fault, but it does become your responsibility of like who you want to be moving forward. And I think that is also like a very hard kind of like ugly thing to navigate. Yeah. And that, you know, your heart is always your responsibility. Yeah. And
it's ultimately having to make a lot of choices for yourself that are not your fault you're having to make.
Yeah. And it's a part of the brokenness in the world. It's a part of the corruption of like just what we live in. And I think it's just we get to be a part of as well, like the story of the bride that God wants to make. And you have to make that choice. And I think it is just, it's hard. Like it's not, and to the point of like, it like Jesus let those people leave. Like, you know what I mean? He let them all walk off and he was willing to let his disciples walk off.
He was like, y'all too?
Yeah. And like, I think that's really the question at the end of the day is like, Jesus is never making you stay there either. Right. Which that's up to you. But anyways, I feel like that's a good way to end. Yeah. Y'all gonna stay? Y'all too?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay.
But thank you so much, Chelsea, for coming and sharing with us. That was amazing. I got so much out of it. I hope you guys got so much out of it. Do you have any last words? Anything cool to say? To plug? I don't know.
I don't have a plug. Okay.
But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. Remember, you can subscribe. You can follow us. Please leave us a comment, 5 stars. What else? Follow us on Instagram, youarehere.pod. You can follow TikTok. Follow our TikTok. Yeah, we're going to have a lot more fun next year. More guests, more good vibes. Yeah. See you guys. Thank you for listening. Bye. Mwah.